Hi guys, Libertman, forced to be alone but free to decide how to live it. Welcome back to the second live stream of the day. And in this occasion we're crossing continents, not physically but psychologically. We're going to look at the silent crisis unfolding among young men in China. A crisis so similar to the one happening across the Western countries that it almost feels like a mirror. If loneliness were a cultural problem, the symptoms would stay inside one society. But when the same patterns appear in countries with different histories, values, and political structure, then what we're looking at is a male-specific global phenomenon. So this stream is grounded entirely in a study which researchers has a very unpronounceable surname. Just the letter L and V is a Chinese researchers. I don't know how to pronounce it. And the study is called Young Adults, Loneliness and Depression During the C19 Pandemic. Just in case I don't pronounce it completely, but you understand what that means. It is one of the clearest and most detailed studies on loneliness among the Chinese young adults, and it contains shocking numbers and psychological mechanisms that apply directly to young men. So this author, LV, examined thousands of Chinese young adults between 18 and 29 years old. So the results are not subtle at all. Loneliness levels were high across the entire population. Loneliness strongly predicted depression, even after controlling for other factors. Young adults with lower resilience were significantly more vulnerable. Emotion regulation strategies determined whether loneliness spiraled into real mental health decline. This is a perfect psychological storm that starts with loneliness, causing emotional suppression. This leading to identity confusion, which causes withdrawal, and this deepens and leads to depression. So what matters for our topic is not only the numbers, but how they match the lived experience of young Chinese men who face a unique mixture of pressure, competition, gender role expectations, and shrinking social circles. Even the authors know that male identity, cultural norms in China, shape how loneliness is expressed and suppressed. So, let's see a bit how young men in China are facing this change in reality. Because for decades, China has gone through an extreme transformation. Faster urbanization than any society in history, intense academic and workplace competition, such as in Western countries, especially in the US, smaller families, fewer siblings, delayed marriage, and the largest gender imbalance, more men than women on the planet. These conditions created a psychological environment where men feel replaceable, overlooked, isolated, and unclear about their role in the new society. The traditional mandate that stated work hard, marry, build a family, prove your worth through stability no longer works for many. The new mandate does not exist. Men are improvising their identity in real time and doing so under enormous pressure. Young Chinese men today describe that social circles have shrunk after university, that their friendships are dissolving when everyone starts competing. Workplaces where vulnerability is seen as weakness, and families that expect achievement but offer little emotional support. So, when we combine high loneliness, as stated in the study by LV, high pressure, restricted emotional expression, and limited social safety nets, you get one dominant response. That is withdrawal. Not because they don't want connection, but because connection feels too risky, too exhausting, too unstable. So let's explore briefly, not too technically, but the psychological mechanism behind the withdrawal. LV, the researcher of this study, shows something crucial. Loneliness does not directly cause depression. It becomes depression when two things fail. First, when resilience fails. If resilience is low, loneliness becomes overwhelming. And second, emotion regulation. If the person cannot express, share, or process emotions, loneliness intensifies. Now consider the cultural expectation placed on young Chinese men. They are expected to not showing weakness, don't burden your family, don't talk about emotions, don't fail, don't fall behind your peers, don't disappoint your parents. So imagine that under these rules, loneliness turns into silence. Silence turns into emotional shutdown. And shutdown turns into depression. But it's not just emotional, it's identity-based isolation. Many young Chinese men report feeling not man enough, not successful enough, not competitive enough, not desire enough, not fulfilling expectations. When identity itself becomes conditional on performance, failure becomes shameful. And shame is the emotion most likely to produce that withdrawal. So, withdrawal is not laziness. We're going to see that there is a coping strategy for our system. So it's not passivity. It's a defensive adaptation to the context. When the social world feels like a battleground, like we are facing nowadays, and every interaction feels like a test, solitude becomes the only place where you are not judged. And young Chinese men often describe withdrawal as temporary escape or a way to recover, a break from expectations. But temporary withdrawal, when it's repeated in cycles, becomes emotional distance, loss of friendships, social anxiety, avoidance, and self-protective isolation. The author shows as well that men who use suppression rather than expression as their emotional strategy experience stronger negative effects of loneliness. So, what does it mean? If you cannot talk about your loneliness gets worse. Men who keep everything inside are the ones who break hardest. This is not cultural, it's neurological. It happens everywhere. But in China, where young men have strict social roles and limited emotional outlets, the effect becomes amplified. So why young men are feeling invisible? Another theme emerging in Chinese studies, interviews, and social media analyzes that young men feel unseen, not necessarily unloved, not necessarily rejected, just unseen. And why is that? Because parents focus on academic performance, teachers focus on competitiveness, employers focus on efficiency, women have more options and higher expectations, society praises productivity, not humanity, communities are smaller, friendships become transactional, and time is consumed by work and survival. So this is not a failure of men. It's a failure of environments that no longer support connection. Think of it like this. If a plant grows in poor soil, the plant is not broken. The soil is broken. Chinese young men are trying to grow in soil that demands everything and returns nothing emotionally. So let's check some parallelism with the West. The problems of young men in China are almost identical to the problems of young men in Europe, in the US, Latin America, and Russia. The language is different, yes. The culture is also different. The political system is different. But the psychology is the same. Loneliness, identity confusion, competition, fear of failure, emotional suppression, social withdrawal. This means the crisis is human, not cultural. This is why the C4PC framework applies across countries, because personality under pressure behaves similarly even when cultures differ. So let's break it down, this topic inside the C4PC model. How each of the macro groups responds to this situation. And also, let's see how young Chinese men and men everywhere can break this cycle slowly but safely. So now is a good moment to have a pause, and if you are enjoying this episode, this live stream, please give the channel, the video a like. If you're watching the replay, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to support this content and to help me decide to continue doing all this effort next month as well, because I'm doing this as an experiment and as a kind of mission I had pending to contribute through my profession, but I'm not sure whether I will go on doing this or not if no one listens. So we were describing this silent crisis of young men in China who are living under loneliness, identity stress, cultural pressure, and emotional suppression. And I was sharing this study by LV, a Chinese researcher, which showed that loneliness becomes depression when resilience is low and emotion regulation fails. So now let's see, let's explore more the personality types, the stress response, and how each of the C4PC group behaves under this Chinese style pressure and Western pressure too, because the patterns are the same. So I'm going to break down how each type collapses and why each type withdraws and what actually works. Not motivational cliches, but nervous system aligned strategies. So let's see the C4PC model under Chinese conditions. In China, just like in the West, loneliness among young men is not random. It follows predictable emotional and cognitive patterns. As you may know, if you are following the channel, the C4PC model, divides men into 4 broad macro groups or categories. Each one of these macro groups contains 4 typologies of personality from the MBTI. So the first group are the internal rational, then we have the internal emotional, the external rational, and the external emotionals. In a high pressure and low support environment, that is the environment documented in this study by ALB in 2022, each type has its own vulnerability point. So loneliness targets each type differently. Let's start with the internal rationals, who are the thinkers. These men respond to loneliness with analysis, not with expression. The internal rational tell themselves, well, I figured this out alone. Feelings complicate things. I need a plan, not a person. And in a society like China, where silence is respected and emotional restraint is culturally reinforced, internal rationals' behaviors are rewarded, which makes them more vulnerable. So how loneliness affects internal rationals? The study highlights that suppression and low emotional expression are strong predictors of depression under loneliness. The internal rationals suppress by default, so their loneliness becomes mental overactivity, obsessive thinking, emotional flatness, reduced motivation, and withdrawal into routines. But why internal rationals withdraw instead of reaching out? Well, because reaching out feels inefficient, unpredictable, and emotionally expensive for them. The internal rational brain thinks talking about problems wastes energy. Understanding the problem is the real solution. But while the internal rational analyzes life, life quietly empties around him. So what actually helped the internal rationals? What helps them is to have one scheduled social anchor per week, because internal rationals survive through structure, not spontaneity. So put a human on the calendar, one friend, one colleague, or activity. Also, replacing rumination with externalization. For internal rationals, journaling is not therapy, it's mental defragmentation. Also, another thing that helps is micro-disclosure, not full vulnerability, but one sentence of honesty is enough to restart emotional circulation. And also to have a project-based connection. Internal rational bond through shared task, not through emotional conversations. So now let's see the case of the internal emotionals, the deep feelers. The internal emotionals experience loneliness as an internal storm. They feel everything intensely and internalize rejection, failure, and pressure. Their default reaction to stress is telling themselves, something is wrong with me. I don't want to be a burden. People won't understand how deeply this hurts. In China, where emotional expression is often discouraged and group harmony is valued over personal authenticity, the internal emotionals become invisible. So, according to this study, how loneliness affects the internal emotionals. The study showed that low resilience is the strongest predictor of depression among lonely young adults. Internal emotionals often have low resilience, high sensitivity, and tendency to retreat into imagination or fantasy. So loneliness becomes self-blame, emotional overwhelm, shame, avoidance, and catastrophic thinking. So why the internal emotional withdrawal? Their core fear is being misunderstood or dismissed. Where internal rationals withdraw to think, the internal emotionals withdraw to protect the purity of their inner emotional world. So let's see what actually helps the internal emotionals. Well, first, to have one safe relationship. Internal emotionals don't need 10 friends, even less 20. But they need one trusted person in order to reduce 70% of their loneliness. Also, they need some sort of creative externalization. Drawing, music, writing. These translate overwhelming feelings into manageable forms. Then also some form of body regulation with breath work or grounding, walking, long distances, slow exercise. Emotional suppression drops dramatically when the nervous system stabilizes. And also to have some sort of guided emotional expression. Talking to someone who listens without fixing shift the entire internal emotional trajectory. Someone who pays attention. And then we have the case of the external rationals, who are the achievers. The external rationals appear strong, confident, socially capable, but loneliness affects them differently. It attacks performance. The external rational default reaction to stress is telling themselves, you have to work harder. They tell to themselves, outperform the feeling. Success will solve everything. And in China's hyper-competitive society, this is gasoline on a fire. Let's see how loneliness affects the external rationals. External rationals have high resilience until they crash. The study shows that when loneliness is combined with suppression, then depression spikes quickly. External rationals suppress constantly to maintain performance. So loneliness becomes overwork, irritability, emotional numbness, loss of purpose, and sudden burnout in the most unexpected moment. So why the external rational withdraw? Well, they do it because talking about loneliness feels like failure. Their identity is tied to competence. If competence collapses, identity collapses. So what actually helps the external rationals? Well, to have some scheduled rest, external rational won't rest unless it's a rule. To have some kind of mentorship and reverse mentorship, external rational reconnect through meaningful guidance, giving and receiving. Also replacing grind relationship with real ones. That is not easy to find, but external rationals often confuse networks with friendships. They need at least one relationship where nothing is at stake. And also to have some purpose checks in. Every week I ask, am I performing or am I living? And lastly, the external emotionals that are the expressive and more social type of men usually look socially confident. They are talkative, energetic, playful, until loneliness hits. External emotional default reaction to stress is telling themselves, I'm losing my spark. People don't want me around. I don't fit anywhere. So, how loneliness affects them? Well, loneliness, when it's added to emotional suppression, leads to a fast deterioration for the external emotions. They normally regulate emotions through expression. If expression is socially punished, as it often is in a strict or competitive environment, then they shut down, they feel rejected, they internalize failure and disappear. And why the external emotional withdrawal? Well, they do it because they fear being too much. They fear embarrassment more than solitude. So they retreat long before others notice something is wrong with them. And what actually helps the external emotionals? Well, to have some structured communities, groups with predictability, clubs, sports, volunteer teams, to have small but frequent interactions. External emotional need momentum, not intensity. To start setting some boundaries prevents emotional overexposure and protect their heart. And also to have some sort of creative social outlets, such as dancing, music, acting, hosting. This rebuild a social identity for them. So if there was a kind of universal solution across all C4PC types, we would have to say that loneliness is not solved by motivation, positive thinking, or telling yourself, I should socialize more. Loneliness is solved by building one stable emotional anchor, then slowly expanding your circle. Slowly. From the study of LV in China, we know that emotion regulation changes everything. That resilience grows with practice, not with personality. And we know that support quality matters more than support quantity. So the solution is not be more social, bro. The solution is reconnect in a way that fits your nervous system and personality type. One connection, one conversation, one routine, one human. That's all it takes to break the cycle. So, men in China, men in the West, we are living parallel lives. Different language, but same silence. Different culture, but same emotional weight. Different expectations, same internal collapse. But you don't have to collapse with it. You are allowed to rebuild. Yeah, slowly, safely, in your own way, at your own pace. So this channel is here to show that you're not alone, not statistically, not psychologically, and not spiritually. So if this live stream helped you understand yourself better, please don't forget to like this live stream, this replay and video, and subscribe to the channel. It helps bring this content to other men who quietly need it. So thank you for listening until the last moment. And please leave your comments in the comment section. And much courage, take care, and see you in the next one.